Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into what I think is honestly one of the most fascinating tensions in the entire global tech landscape right now. We're looking at Mistral AI. Now, if you follow AI, you know they're widely celebrated as Europe's absolute top artificial intelligence champion. And their whole brand identity? It's built on a very specific promise: digital sovereignty. Basically, the idea that European data should stay under European law, completely free from the reach of foreign tech giants. But when you look a little closer at their commercial reality, there is this massive paradox right at the heart of their business. It's really a story of myth versus reality, and the future of an entire continent's tech independence kind of hangs in the balance here. So let's just dive right into this.
Okay, I want to start off with a number that is going to completely reframe how you think about this company: 40%. According to their own CEO, Arthur Mensch, roughly 40% of Mistral's revenue actually comes from the United States and other non-European clients. Just, sit with that for a second. The exact company that built a massive valuation specifically on the promise of not being American, selling this idea of purity and local control, is earning nearly half of its money completely outside of Europe. So, how does that sovereignty story actually survive contact with the company's own commercial reality?
To really understand Mistral, we first need to understand the sheer scale of the fight they're in. Mistral sits at roughly a $23 billion valuation, with give or take 350 employees. On the flip side, U.S. frontier labs, think OpenAI and Anthropic, are operating at a combined valuation north of $850 billion. That's billion with a B. Mistral is not a peer of the U.S. frontier labs. Not at all. They are a challenger fighting in a completely different weight class. Literally David taking on Goliath with a fraction of the resources. And honestly, their strategy only starts to make sense once you accept that fundamental reality.
All right, let's move into Act 1, the frontier fight, and where Mistral stands today.
Let's take a totally honest look at the shape of Mistral's actual product portfolio. So their flagship consumer chat app Vibe and the Large 3 model, they are visibly trailing behind the bleeding edge of the frontier. It's a pretty bare-bones experience compared to the heavy hitters. In the middle, you've got their small 4 model and API pricing, which are highly competitive and solidly average. They've essentially become a fantastic default second model for developers, but at the end of the day, that's a commodity position. But here's the catch. Where Mistral is surprisingly dominant is in the less compute-bound niches. Products like OCR4 for document processing and LeanStral 1.5 for formal math proofs are actually hitting state-of-the-art levels. They're losing at the main frontier, sure, but they are absolutely winning at the edges.
But here is the existential threat to their technology strategy. Mistral's main differentiator was supposed to be open-weight models, right? Well, that technical moat is vanishing, and it's vanishing fast. Chinese labs have released these incredibly powerful, permissively licensed open models. Think DeepSeek V4 and Qwen 3.6, which often flat-out beat Mistral on key benchmarks. And now, American labs are jumping into the open space too with models like Inkling. The open part of Mistral's moat is literally being aggressively taken by the US and China. So what's left? Just the European part. And guys, that is a legal argument. It's not a technical one.
To see how that actually plays out on the ground, just consider this pretty stinging anecdote from TechCrunch. Among the startup founders at Station F, which, by the way, is Paris's own massive premier startup campus, Anthropic's Claude is actually more popular than Mistral's models. I mean, really think about what that means. If you can't even win over the developers in your own home city based purely on the merit of the product, then European alternative isn't really a product strategy that wins hearts and minds, is it? It's strictly a procurement argument.
Act 2, the sovereign stack, strategy amidst the chaos.
Now, Mistral's recent announcements might look like a totally chaotic product sprawl, but it's actually an attempt at massive vertical integration. They are trying to build the entire AI stack themselves. They're exploring designing their own ships, they're investing 4 billion euros in data centers, acquiring cloud platforms like Koyab, building the base models, offering fine-tuning, and even building agentic workflows. That is an absolutely absurd surface area for a tiny 350-person company to tackle. I mean, every single one of these layers requires fighting a better capitalized, deeply entrenched incumbent.
So why do it then? Why on earth would you fight on 6 fronts at once? Well, as one French analyst perfectly summarized it, sovereignty cannot be partial, it must be total, or it is an illusion. Mistral is trying to sell pure sovereignty to highly regulated clients. You can't credibly look a French bank in the eye and promise their data will never leave French jurisdiction, but then turn around and run their models on cloud compute rented out of a server farm in Virginia, right? To sell the product of sovereignty, you absolutely have to control every single layer of the infrastructure.
But here is where reality really bites back. Neutrally speaking, to build this sovereign escape route, Mistral currently has to drive on American roads. They maintain a Palo Alto office where a lot of their key researchers sit. They distribute their models globally through Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, and Google Cloud. They're completely reliant on NVIDIA for their silicon, and they've taken significant backing from U.S. venture capital. And look, this isn't hypocrisy. It's just the uncomfortable operating reality of bootstrapping an AI company today. But it does introduce a massive incentive and dependency risk. If Washington were to restrict AI chip access tomorrow, Mistral would be in serious trouble, regardless of being a French company.
And you know what? The geopolitical chessboard just got even more complicated. Mistral is no longer Europe's only sovereign champion. Earlier this year, Canada's Cohere and Germany's Aleph Alpha merged to create a $20 billion transatlantic entity, heavily backed by Germany's Schwarz Group. For a German buyer, that transatlantic partnership might actually be a much more appealing sovereign story than buying French. Mistral's positioning is suddenly looking a lot more like a regional French primary advantage, rather than a true monopoly over the whole European continent.
Act 3, the true playbook. The B2B Powerhouse. So if consumer chat isn't winning, where's the real value? Well, the secret to Mistral's incredible run rate growth, which by the way has shot up to $400 million in annual recurring revenue, lies in very specific legal certifications. Take Secnum Cloud, for example. It is a strict French standard that demands not just operational security, but complete legal sovereignty. Now, because of the U.S. Cloud Act, which allows U.S. law enforcement to demand data from U.S. incorporated companies, even if that data is held overseas, American hyperscalers simply cannot hold the certification in its native form. So the absolute crucial takeaway here is that this creates a legally grounded moat for Mistral. It's a market where the Americans are literally barred by law from competing.
And let me tell you, that legal moat translates into massive, incredibly sticky contracts in highly regulated verticals. We are talking about financial services, healthcare, and crucially, defense. The French Armed Forces recently signed a massive framework agreement to deploy Mistral. You've also got these deep industrial AI contracts with manufacturing giants like Airbus and BMW. In these spaces, engineering and national security data is just way too sensitive to send to a US API. The law decides the deal here, not just who has the highest benchmark score on some coding test. Which actually brings us right back to that 40% paradox we talked about at the very beginning of the explainer. Earning massive revenue outside of Europe isn't a failure of their mission. It's actually their greatest strategic advantage. Mistral is essentially exporting sovereignty as a service. Think about countries in India, the Gulf, Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America. These are nations that want to completely control their own AI destiny. They want neither American nor Chinese AI dictating their tech stack. For them, Mistral represents a totally independent, neutral third path.
So, if we take a step back and really look at the whole picture, the narrative around this company needs a major shift. The media absolutely loves to call them Europe's OpenAI, constantly judging them on consumer chat apps and frontier leaderboards. But honestly, that's a game they probably can't win at their current scale. Instead, Mistral's true destiny might actually be to become Europe's Palantir. By embedding forward-deployed engineers straight into the headquarters of their enterprise clients and dominating the defense and industrial sectors, they are quietly building an incredibly durable, high-value B2B powerhouse.
Which leads us to this. The CEO of Mistral has publicly set a wildly aggressive, completely self-imposed target, reaching $1 billion in annual recurring revenue by the end of 2026. This is it. This is the ultimate test. It will finally prove whether European AI sovereignty is just some romantic myth subsidized by government grants, or if it is a ruthlessly effective, highly profitable global business reality. Will the sovereignty premium truly hold up in the global market? Well, keep your eyes on that scoreboard in December 2026. It's going to be absolutely fascinating to see if Europe's ultimate AI champion actually needs Europe to survive at all. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the reality behind the tech.